Good morning, everyone. I'm Stephen Johnson. I'm Chief Customer Officer at Voicescape, and I'd like to welcome you to this, the second in our series of webinars focused on the importance of resilient relationships in social housing. I think you'll agree, a theme that's really come to the fore given the recent challenges that we're all facing, and specifically within our sector. At Voicescape, we specialise in providing technology and services that help social landlords build sustainable tenancies, mainly through improved customer engagement. So the importance of the tenant-landlord relationship is something that is central to everything that we do. And the inspiration for this series came from a piece of research we undertook shortly after the lockdown period, where we reached out to our customers also, just to understand what impact the new situation, the emerging context might be having. And through this research, a range of insights were gleaned, but by far one of the key strongest themes to emerge was the increasing importance that we need to be placing on that landlord-tenant relationship, the role that it has to play in building sustainable tenancies, but also building strength against current and future challenges that we might be facing. And I'm really pleased that we're doing this now. Because I think we may have fallen into the trap of talking of COVID in the past tense. So how the lockdown affected how we're doing things, as though that we can now do the post-mortem and write the history on this and move on. But as we've seen this week, COVID is very much a present tense issue. It's an emerging story that we'll have to continue to respond to, especially as we're looking now at the removal of furlough. We're looking at further local lockdowns, potentially future national lockdowns. So it's even more important now that we are sharing these ideas, we are sharing learning, and we're focusing on building those customer relationships. And I'm pleased to say we've got some fantastic speakers today to help us with some of these issues, to shed some light and some insight on how we might be dealing with this. So we'll be kicking off with Jenny Osborne, MBE. So Jenny is Chief Executive at TPAS, Jenny Osborne, MBE. Then Jenny does a great job of ranging from the strategic and policy position right down to customer voice and the importance of customer relationships on the ground. Unfortunately, Jenny can't join us today, but we do have a recording of her presentation from our previous webinar, including the Q&A session also. So if I suddenly appear with a different background and a different shirt on, it's not because I've just done a quick dramatic costume change, it's because it's the recording that we drew from the previous webinar that we did with Jenny. However, if you do have any questions for Jenny, please do put them in the questions tab, because we'll be collating those and taking those to Jenny to respond, and we can get back to you individually. So I think we've may have just had a problem with sound, but I think that might have been rectified now. So I was just recapping that we're a fantastic group of speakers that we've got today. We'll be kicking off with Jenny Osborne, Chief Executive at TPAS. So a range of insights from Jenny. We will be playing Jenny's recording. She can't join us here today. But we do have the recording from her previous session that she did with us, including the Q&A that I did with her at that session. So if I suddenly turn up with a different shirt on and a different background, it's not a dramatic costume change. It's the recording that we did with Jenny at the previous webinar. Saying that, if you do have any questions for Jenny, please do post them in the questions tab, because we will be collating those and taking them to Jenny, and we can be responding to you individually. But also feel free to use the discussion tab, also the chat tab. I'll cover this off with a bit of housekeeping shortly, but any discussion to stimulate around Jenny's presentation. After Jenny, we'll be welcoming Rowena Chiplin, who's Head of Income Services at Metropolitan Thames Valley. A compelling story from Rowena of how her team has responded to COVID lockdown, the positive impact it's had on customer relationships and income collection, and some of the measurements that they're being able to put to that. And then with the time that's left, I'll be sharing some of the findings that we at Voicescape have gleaned through our own research in relation to the importance of customer relationships. So a great programme ahead of us. Just a bit of housekeeping now. We will be running question and answer sessions after each speaker. So we won't be saving everything up till the end. We'll be having a 5 or 10 minute Q&A session after each of the speakers. So if you'll look to the top right-hand corner of your view, you'll see various options there, various tabs. We have a questions tab, which kind of speaks for itself. Please submit your questions at any point throughout the presentations using the questions tab. I'll be collating those myself, and then when our speakers finish, I'll compose those questions to the speakers at that point. You'll also notice a polls tab in the top right as well. We'll be running a series of straw polls throughout the session. So please do keep an eye on the polls tab there. It'd be good to get your response, your participation, your views and opinions on some of the questions we're going to pose through the straw polls. I mentioned the chat room. We've got Mohammed from Voicescape in the chat room there, looking after folks who maybe want to start up some discussion about any of the themes that are emerging through the presentations that we've got. And finally, if you'd like to comment on the session through social media or field any further questions through social media, the hashtag is Voicescape Thought Leaders. Okay, so in the absence of fire drills to announce and toilets to direct you to in this virtual environment, I'd like you to hand you over now to our first speaker. As I mentioned, Chief Executive at TPAS, Jenny Osborne MBE, who will be talking about how COVID has the potential to reframe our relationship with social housing tenants. Over to you, Jenny.
Hello, well, thank you to Stephen, and thank you to Voicescape for inviting me here today to speak. It's a real pleasure to be able to talk to you all today. My name's Jenny Osborne. I'm the Chief Executive of TPAS, who we are the tenant engagement experts working across England. And I'm here really to talk about our perspective, our reflections. I'm really on about 3 things I'm going to try and cover today. So I'm going to focus really in terms of the landlord-tenant relationship. I'm going to focus a little bit back on what's gone on over the last 6 months, obviously. So I'll talk a little bit about that. And obviously that will feed into what I think is going to change over in the future. Talk a little bit about the kind of the more immediate things we've seen change around engagement. And then I'll also talk and I'll end around the kind of the policy landscape. So to give you that kind of TPAS perspective, and what the bigger issues may be around how tenants and landlords will work together in the future. So hopefully that's okay for everybody. So in terms of sector response, well, I mean, I think generally, I think you'll hear more on this from the speakers that follow me, but I think generally we can say it's been good. I think, if we take ourselves back to those early days in kind of March and April, a lot of activity across the sector. I think, again, we'll hear a lot about this, I'm sure, and you've already done so, but we've seen a lot of interest, haven't we, in the phone calls. Who would have thought that the humble phone call would come back into vogue in the way that it did, in terms of the primary way of connecting with tenants again? I think those phone calls were really well received in the main from tenants that we spoke to and speaking to organisations. And I think the key thing around that was the amount of information that we gleaned from that. Didn't we learn, who was living in our homes, what their needs were, who they were already connected with, what they were doing in their community. We found out lots of information. So from that perspective, really impressive, really good. I think as well, if I had £1 for every time people have said to me, another aspect of that was important was reconnecting. So housing staff saying to their chief execs, Lincoln Eck, it's been lovely to get back talking to tenants again. It's been lovely to be able to do my job again, talking to people, hearing what they've got to say, and then crucially, being able to act on things, to do something, to make a difference, to put something in place for people. And I think, again, as a sector, we need to take that learning forward and remember that staff have really welcomed engaging back in a face-to-face, be it over the phone or whatever way, with the communities in which they work. And that's really crucial that we remember that as part of our response. I've mentioned loads of new data, got loads of that, haven't we now? So I think the challenge now for us all is what do we do with it? Where do we use that information? It'll have exposed some gaps that we had in our information, that's fine. We now should have plans to fill those gaps and to do something with that data for the future. I think the other thing I've said a few times, if you've heard me speak before, is it was too quick to get tenants involved in the plans once we went into lockdown. That all happened so fast, didn't it? We just had to react and deal with it on a day-to-day basis. What I've been urging people to do, though, is making sure, as part of strengthening that tenant-landlord relationship, tenants are involved in the recovery plans, the transformation plans, the resilience plans, whatever you're calling them, that we make sure as we come out, and even if we go into fluctuations of local lockdowns up and down, it's going to be so important to make sure tenants are part of the recovery plan in the future. So if we think as well about the community response, I'll just briefly touch on this. You know, again, I think it's all been said before. It's not just been about the landlords, has it, in the sector? The communities in many cases just got on and did things for themselves, often before landlords or councils did. And I think that's important to remember that again as we go forward. We are not always, as landlords, just the rescuers of people. It's a narrative we need to drive out from the sector. Communities are resilient in their own way. Communities react in their own way, and we have to make sure we respond to that. But hasn't it been wonderful to see some of the response that we've had? Real thriving community spirit in places. I think the questions we now have to ask ourselves are, how do we support that in the future? How do we supplement it? How do we help perhaps fund it? Or how do we get out the way and leave those community groups to get on with what they've been doing, probably far better than some of us were able to do. I think the thing that's interesting and we have to react to now as time goes forward is the growth in online communities as well as our physical communities. So, of course, in the early days, we saw an explosion, didn't we, of kind of Facebook groups, WhatsApp groups starting up. Where are they now? And how do you, as landlords, how do all of us in the sector connect with those, as well as the kind of physical community groups that are out there as well, restarting back up again? So that balance of those two will be interesting. But I think the big thing, isn't it, now we all know, is what is going to be the impact on communities for the long-term future in terms of mental health, in terms of job losses, in terms of furlough is ending. So, you know, poverty, we've got to really think about kind of ongoing support for our communities. I think the other thing, again, I'll try and be quick on this, but I think, you know, I think for many people, it's been a real time of positive relationships with local authorities and partnership working. And again, we can build on that, can't we, now for the future? I think we've been able to demonstrate in many cases what practical impact local action can have. I hope that will lead to driving out some duplication in the future. I hope it will enable us, as I said before, to support other people's efforts better where they're doing it better, that time to step aside. I think we've seen things like, and we'll continue to see things like stock swaps across the sector increasing in order to make sure that we can deliver services better for our residents. So Paradigm, Guinness in particular, I know I've seen, but there's been plenty of others. And I'm not saying from that small is necessarily better in terms of landlord size, but I do think the importance of being able to deliver locally is going to be more crucially important. So I think we'll see far more of that. We need to make sure in our structures we can connect locally with the people in our homes when we need to, because we don't know what's going to happen, do we, in the future. And then the other one is around decision making. I think it's had an impact over the last few months. I think for many of us, for staff, for board members, for involved tenants in particular, it's laid bare, hasn't it? Some of the inequalities that are in there in our society, not just around housing, but across society generally. And I think we've got to be honest and upfront now about how we tackle those inequalities as board members, as staff members, as involved tenants in the future. What are we going to do? I think as a board member myself, I found it, you know, really interesting around all the stuff, certainly in the early days, around compliance. How are we going to get people's homes for our gas checks? It's kind of put a human story around all of those reports that I get as a board member, and I hope it has for other people. There's a human story behind every not refusal for access. But I think it's also shown some of the pressures that our contractors are under in terms of working in our communities, and we have to be mindful about that. And some of that, I think we can adapt our processes for the future, can't we? I think in terms of decision making about where we invest in the future, that's been thrown into sharp relief, hasn't it? Where are we going to spend our resource in the future around digital? And I'll come to that a bit more later. The quality of our temporary accommodation, is it good enough? What can we do better from that in the future should we have this again? And what can we do even more than we have been doing to improve our repair service for our tenants? We can make decisions faster when we want to. Again, if I've had £1 for every time someone said to me, Jenny, we implemented in 2 days what I thought was going to take us 2 years. We had a strategy and we did it so quickly. Well, I'm not saying that's going to happen for everything. because we're not going to be in a pandemic, hopefully, as like this again. But I do think it shows that when we need to, we can put systems aside and we can get on with things that doesn't have to be 100% right. They can be 80% right, and we can put things right afterwards. So I think pushing on that, tenants will push on that. But I think we've all got incumbent on all of us to say, what can we do to make decision making faster, more accountable, more in real time, and more based on local insight and local information? I think that's exciting, but we can do more of that. And then, you know, final slide really on this bit is looking at the future of the office. What will this mean for our future relationship with tenants and how we will work as staff? There'll be different dynamics, I think, come out of this in terms of we're not all working from offices in the same way. You know, I took some learning from this. A couple of people mentioned to me, staff and tenants, you know, tenants have said during this, I really hated going to the office actually. Some of these big corporate flashy offices that we've got in the sector, actually, what did that used to do for people that were walking in those buildings to a boardroom to have a meeting with a lot of staff lined up on one side of a room and tenants on the other? Did we really do that well? Did we really make that a good environment for collaborating and learning and sharing stuff? I think we'll have to reflect on that. I think what we've got now, very different decision making when tenants and staff are both equally sat on a Zoom call at home, in their own offices, on their own settees. That makes for decision making and collaboration to be quite different. So I think that's equalised out some things. So what will we miss if we don't all go back to the offices in quite the same way? Well, that's to spin out, isn't it, and to see. But I do think, you know, how we're going to work a bit more equally will be interesting. Okay, so if we just kind of, you know, move on now really to have a think about how engagement has changed. I mean, this is still, you know, obviously a work in progress, isn't it? But a few things I suppose I've mentioned really here. The first, clearly, obviously, is going to be about going digital. I mean, that has catapulted forward in the time since March. In particular, we saw scrutiny teams moving online and continuing to run scrutiny projects through those months. Now, that probably would have taken weeks or months to get people to agree to doing that if this hadn't happened. And I think that's really positive, because what people are reporting back to me is that what they're able to do is have more meetings quicker. You can get more people involved. You can get decisions made quicker. So rather than waiting another 3 months for everyone to come to a face-to-face meeting and get everybody organised and take loads of time out of people's diary, we can have a meeting, can't we, in another 2 or 3 weeks, and we can move some of those actions forward. And rather than, again, trying to coordinate diaries of lots of people and heads of housing and whoever else you might want to call to a meeting, we can usually now get in people's diaries a lot quicker because people are travelling and it's on a 45-minute Zoom call. So I think that's really, really helpful. I think that is, you know, we're hearing that from many, many people, that it's making things a bit sharper in how people can engage. And it's not just scrutiny groups, it's other groups as well. Obviously, I mentioned before, Facebook groups, WhatsApp groups are all joining up and starting to link together and putting people in touch in a way they haven't been before. But I think one of the downsides, obviously, of digital, and I'm sure many people are experiencing this, I hope you can read that slide, is that digital and access is a problem for lots of people as well. There's some figures there from the Lloyd's Digital Index, but I think, so it's not just a housing issue, it's across society. We've got some real issues in digital engagement, haven't we? We're going to have to address if we want to make this work for the future. We've got issues around infrastructure of digital access. We've got the resources themselves, you know, have people got the right equipment to be able to do it? Can people afford to have internet in their homes? And if they can't, what are we going to do about that? And then obviously there's an issue around skills as well that we need to address. So it's not just it's not a sort of an easy win, this around digital engagement, but it is here to stay. We all know that. It's a huge opportunity for engagement, but we've got to have a serious conversation about who's going to pay for it and who's going to fund it. It does give us a huge flexibility as organisations, so we need to bear that in mind in terms of a value for money agenda. And we've got to capitalise, haven't we, here, that we can get to other tenants like we've all been asking for years. How do we get more tenants involved? Well, this is one of the ways we can do that, because we can get people involved faster, for shorter periods of times, and in ways they want to be engaged and in ways they're comfortable with. So, you know, that value for money agenda around digital engagement has got to be an argument I think we could all win and all do something about quite successfully. What else has been happening over this time? Well, if I sort of talk a little bit about from a TPAS perspective, we've kind of renamed some of our consultancy work that we've been doing around re-engineering engagement. And I think that's where kind of most people seem to be landing now, wanting to talk to us about taking this time to say, we've learned so much over this time. We realise we want to get closer to our tenants. We realise we want to hear even more from people we hadn't heard from before. How do we do that? How do we create the structures in our engagement practices, in our engagement culture, to really, really start again and really kind of motor through on this and make a difference quickly. So we've been talking to lots of organisations on this and talking about, particularly around hearing from those voices that you don't always hear from. I think that's always something people are looking to hear about. We've been using a new kind of structure to sort of talk about that, a new kind of model, if you like, a new pyramid to talk about that. Hopefully it's kind of self-explanatory. But, you know, one of the outcomes from the Social Housing Green Paper in 2018 was to make sure that people had engagement frameworks that were really open, transparent and accountable, but really able to evidence and really demonstrate how tenants have been listened to. And part of what this pyramid's about is about really showing that. So hopefully it's helpful for the sector. I'm really hearing a lot more from people about how can we prove that we are hearing from people and what they've got to say. Just excuse me while I move some notes slightly along. It's they just fell down, but there we go. That's what happens on these meetings, isn't it? So I think, you know, these accountability models, you know, they've got to involve the board, haven't they? They've got to involve our governing structures, senior managers, senior staff, all staff actually, to make sure tenants' voices are heard at all parts of the business. We want to see engagement, I think, don't we, all of us, for the future that really does influence, challenge, change services as a result of tenant involvement. I think this model tries to set some of the guidance to doing that. So obviously at that kind of be aware level at the top, that's for all residents. We all want, in some ways, our tenants to be aware of who we are and some of the things that we've got out there. And that might literally just be that they're aware, you know, that we've got a call centre. It might be that they're aware they can get an annual report from us, whatever it might be, a conversation. That's all it might be. And then as the funnel changes, we get more levels of involvement, but probably from you know, less people, and that's fine. That's how it should be, isn't it? People might want to kind of opt in a bit more. So yeah, I'm happy to be contacted every so often on this, or people might chip in with doing surveys, step walkabouts, whatever it might be. And then we move up to the kind of more involved engagement that people would probably associate as the kind of more traditional sort of stuff, but isn't really. It's just because it's more formal structures and it's less people involved. It's still part of this whole pyramid of engagement where we might get tenants involved in co-designing new services from the start. We'll get people obviously in scrutiny involved. We'll get people taking part in AGMs or whatever it might be. So we move through that. And then we end obviously with kind of the real leading that might go on, probably, you know, particularly from tenant board members, but also increasingly across the sector, we are seeing the rise of kind of subcommittees of the board, but with real delegated powers to talk about customer facing services with budgets and with responsibilities to really hold the main board to account on, are you actually doing what you say you're going to do in terms of listening to tenants? So I think that's a structure we can start to look at far more in the future. And then finally on this section is around where's the evidence, and that's linked, isn't it, to all of what I've just talked about in the pyramid before. As one of my consultancy managers says, it's much harder to dismiss evidence, and it's easier to dismiss opinion. And I think that's somewhere about it. It encapsulates some of the criticism of engagement has been over the years, isn't it? Oh, it's just the opinions of a few tenants that are involved. Well, those opinions are valid, but yes, of course, what we want to do is widen that out and make sure we're hearing the opinions of lots of people, but also supplement that with the data and the analysis that we should be getting in now, and we are far more capable of doing in our organisations. Our mantra should be far more, can we test it? Can we prove it? And that real evidence-based challenge that I think we need to embed in the sector, drawing on that range of data, range of insight from far more people, is a mindset that we've got to create now in our staff, in our boards, and in our tenant base. You know, it should be about both of those things, shouldn't it? Qualitative and quantitative information that are all feeding in all different parts of the business to create a mindset, a culture that says, I am going to make sure that what we do, how we change our services, is based on what tenants are telling us from a range of perspectives. And then that comes back to something we've talked about a lot, haven't we, since Grenfell? You know, are we really ready to listen? And I think, you know, again, the pandemic has thrown that again into sharp focus for us. And I think generally tenants would say, well, this isn't complicated. All you've got to do is listen to us and get to know us and what we need and what our requirements are by doing that. If you really listen, we spend a lot of time, I think, in the sector spending money, sending staff on, and involve tenants on courses for how to write reports, give presentations, facilitate. It's all about transmitting, isn't it? I think we need to gain better skills as a sector, all of us, and create that time to really, really, truly listen, to hear what tenants are telling us, and also those that aren't talking out. What by not speaking out are they saying, in a way, I suppose? We've got to create the mechanisms, we've got to create the culture, we've got to create the systems that can hear voices that are speaking out, but also using that, what we're being told in other ways across all different mechanisms to tell us what tenants really do want. Okay, so just to kind of get to the final part really of my presentation, you'll be pleased to hear, I'm sure. It's just around the policy environment. Just very quickly want to kind of bring it to that level. All of that's been going on over the last 6 months, but where are we in terms of the rebalance of the tenant and landlord relationship from a policy perspective? Well, certainly over the last few months, I'm sure none of you can have failed not to have heard from Fiona McGregor, from the regulator, over the last few months. She's been very clear, I think, in her messaging, what she's been saying in about what people should be getting on with, what people should be doing. I can't believe there can be a board member or a staff member out there in the sector that isn't sure of the direction of travel of the regulator. They are going to take a far bigger interest in tenants and the tenant experience. I think, again, what's been great about this period of time is, you know, tenants have heard from Fiona themselves. They've heard from the regulator and lots of other people in the sector, so they know it too. So they've not had to miss out by not being able to trundle down to London for big sector conferences. What's happened over the last 6 months, we've been able to hear from a wider range of voices, and tenants have heard that directly. So I think tenant board members in particular have a real role to play here in ensuring that boards are getting this, that the regulator is going to take this really, really seriously in the future. I think the other example from the sector that's been really moving forward at pace over this time is the Housing Ombudsman. We've got a new code for handling complaints, and I think that's really important. I think it's a great step forward. I think it's been well received by the sector and was much needed, definitely. It should lead to faster handling of complaints, better handling of complaints. It should help to drive out, I think, in the future, some of that incessant delay that some organisations insisted on putting into the complaints process to try and stifle complaints and send them in an ever-going loop that never got resolved. We've seen the Ombudsman, haven't we, recently naming landlords, particularly this last week or so, around handling of leaseholder complaints. We know we can all do better on that, long overdue, and we must do that. So all of this will continue to grow from the Housing Ombudsman Service, and that's powerful. And again, tenants, boards and staff will need to make sure they're responding to that. I think the other things that are going on, obviously, are a fair other few things. The most important, obviously, being the Grenfell Tower inquiry is still ongoing. Loads of learning still to come from that. Loads of shocks, I'm sure, still to come in what we're going to hear in some of the evidence. That remains massively high on the agenda, and rightly so. And we have to keep pushing for the change we need from that. Obviously, the Building Safety Bill is out at the moment, and so that huge focus for boards, both from the safety perspective, rightly so, but also from the cost perspective that it will bring in terms of what we need to put right across our stock. TPAS is obviously focused on the resident involvement, the resident engagement side of the bill and the strategies that will be put in place. We'll be keeping a close eye on that and hope in bringing our expertise to how we can make that the best we can possibly make it. But again, it's like everything we've talked about before. Let's do it with tenants. Let's do it with consultation. Let's do it properly, and make sure everybody's part of that conversation. And I'm sure TPAS, like many of you, responded to the NHF's Code of Governance consultation last week. We're really broadly supportive of the NHF code. Again, big step forward. So all of these things are coming together, aren't they, to say the tenant-landlord relationship has to be rebalanced, has to be reset, and has to be better than it has been in the past, and that's really positive. I think the final point, though, really to end on is the white paper that we hope is coming in November. I think everyone in the sector is saying November, so we're going to look really stupid if it doesn't happen then, but I think it is. And the progress on the previous slides that I've mentioned, from the regulator, the ombudsman, the code, all of this, this is an all part of leading up to the real final changes we want to see from a white paper that delivers. All those tenants that contribute to the roundtables with the ministers and has contributed online over the last 3 years since Grenfell have made it very clear that they want to see regulatory change, that we need to see regulatory protection and support. We want to see increased consumer regulation, we want to see it measured, and then we want to see it acted upon, and we think that's coming in the white paper in some way, and that will drive change, of course it will. But for me, the overriding thing is culture. As Fiona's been saying, you don't need to wait for the white paper. You should have been doing lots of this already. Get your culture right in your organisation, and whatever the regulation brings, you can get that right with having the right culture and driving that with your staff, with your tenants, with your board. It really is an exciting time for engagement. We've got so much we've got right in the past, but now what we can do is focus on getting even more right with that regulatory change behind us as well. Thank you very much, everybody, for listening.
Thanks for that, Jenny. Really fascinating. It's always good to hear you speak, and you, again, the passion you bring as far as a representative of the tenant voice goes. So thank you for that. Really interesting. I would encourage people who are tuning in to submit some questions for Jenny. We don't need to wait till the end of the presentation to submit questions through the questions tab. I do have enough of my own to keep Jenny busy for quite a while yet, but whilst we're doing that, if you guys out there have anything you'd like to put to Jenny, please do put that in the questions tab. So loads to go out there, Jenny. Really interesting perspective on the customer and a relationship through the lens of engagement. Now, one of the key things there, as you mentioned, is the explosion in digital that we've all seen over the past few months. And I see that that's creating certain opportunities in terms of tenant engagement. But what do you think are the pros and cons of digital engagement within your context?
Yes, I've had to put my headphones on, sorry, so I look a bit stupid now. But anyway, yeah, I mean, God, haven't we been talking about this for months and months and months about, and I think we'd got to a place in the sector that said, of course, it's got to be a blend. It's got to be a blend of digital and face-to-face. What happened in March was we just catapulted to the other extreme of going digital, didn't we? Digital only, which has had its benefits, like I said earlier in the presentation, about getting loads of people online, getting people comfortable with it, getting people understanding this is a way of working that doesn't need months and months of planning and protocols. And, people do behave on digital. All those things we were worried about, they didn't materialise, did they? Of course, everybody's now saying, sort of 5-6 months in, we want to get back to some face-to-face, and that is dead important. So I think, what we've now had foisted on us is you will make a blend of digital and face-to-face, and we can make it work. And we're sort of in the right place to do that. So there's benefits of COVID, but one of the things that's happened is that. So digital, I think, like I mentioned, digital is great for getting more people involved at different times, different people, different age groups, all of those things. That's great. We've got so many of our tenants now working from home, haven't we? So, now it's a time to test our theories of, it's always been because we couldn't get people to come out at night or to come out in the workday. Well, let's test that now. Let's see if that was the reason people didn't want to get involved with you. I suspect there's probably other reasons. There'll be, nobody's forgotten the whole trust issue that we've still got to work on and build before people even want to try and connect with you. I think some of the work that we've done in the behavioural insight work that we've done with yourselves is around, the language we use about people. That's not changed just because we're doing it in a digital way rather than face-to-face. When we talk about engagement, involvement, empowerment, is that really landing with anybody? And I think from a digital perspective, to get people engaged, we really need to think about the language we use and make sure that it's inviting, it's welcoming, it's understandable, it entices people to want to get involved. So I'll let you answer the question. I just think it's exciting. I think, but I think there's also just inevitably a need, as the next few weeks unfold and months, to get people back face to face. My worry, and I think it's human nature, it's not specific about engagement, is people need to build relationships with people. And that's important. And you can do a lot of that over these kind of things. I think certainly for very involved tenants in particular, or tenants that want to come to talk to you about, let's say, service failures, or to help you co-create something quite in depth or complicated, I think we're still going to want to employ some face-to-face methods for that. So it's nothing more complicated than, let's get this blend right now. We've got the chance to do it.
Yeah, exactly. And is there a risk, do you think, now that landlords potentially have experienced how easy or how much easier it is to engage customers through digital channels? And I'm thinking of that kind of tenant voice type of engagement that TPAS specialise in. Is there a danger that providers may start to rely on that now, and there's only I suppose there's only certain sorts of engagement that you can get through face to face, and we start relying too much on digital and lose that really kind of more substantial stuff that we can get through face to face? Am I being a bit cynical, or is there a risk that providers are going to move in that direction? It becomes a bit tokenistic.
No, I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right, and I think that's what this is the time now, isn't it, to reflect on some of those. What will there's always a gain and there's always a loss, isn't it? And what could we lose by just trying to do all our changing of services, all of that on Zoom? I think there's a danger it pushes people too fast. I think it's a danger that it asks people to kind of look at things and not have the chance to in-depth check them out and research them. We all know a lot of conversations or bits of information are gleaned before a meeting or after a meeting or as you walk into the car park. And I don't think, and that's not being trite, I think those are important factors in service design, in a relationship that's collaborative of people working together. So yeah, I think we have to make sure that, because I think there's a danger that people might say, you've done all this digital now, we're investing, we're going to keep investing, to make kind of that money stack up, then we need to move to just digital only, and it's quicker. And actually that's false. That's false economy, isn't it? It is, without a doubt. We're human beings and we need to meet face to face for the bigger stuff that needs real relationship building. You don't build relationships as easy, do we, like this?
No, exactly. We have had a question from the audience, and this question relates to those customers who potentially have vulnerabilities or other reasons why digital engagement for them is very, very difficult, if not impossible. And just wondering, Jenny, do you have any best practice examples or any knowledge of what NatFed are doing, or housing providers themselves, to support those folks as this shift towards digital might be leaving them behind a little?
I think, I'm not sure what the NatFed are doing particularly, I can't speak for them. In terms of, I think it has been a real shock for people, again mentioned on that slide earlier about digital access. I think there's been quite a few organisations that have been surprised. So if I just talk from an engagement perspective, which is what kind of I know, then, we had a lot of engaged tenants that were good at, that had access to, email, that had access to being able to contribute in that way, could download documents maybe and all of that. But actually, when we had to switch very quickly to all of this kind of technology, it was hard. It was hard to train people to do that, and it was not everyone had the internet provision or what other equipment to do that. So I think it's I think most house providers I've spoken to are taking this seriously now about how are they going to put in place some strategies to help people. And I think like I mentioned, it's about, I don't know, Hacked, for example, I mentioned, are talking about this from a community perspective. How are we going to do this seriously in the future if we haven't got people that have got the right connectivity? So how, read an article today in Inside Housing about, if we're going to build homes, if we're going to convert office blocks to homes in the future, we've got to do that by putting better internet connectivity in, haven't we, from the start? So I think we've got to have some serious conversations about money and about the funding of this. It cannot be a hand-wringing exercise and going, someone else will pick this up. I think if we're serious about wanting to help our tenants, be it engagement, be it with income, be it with anything, then we as housing providers have to put some money on the table to help them get connected in the way that we would want them to be.
Exactly. It's the bottom line in terms of investment, isn't it? Definitely. You mentioned the white paper there, Jenny. Now, I know TPAS and yourself particularly are very active as far as lobbying goes and taking that campaigning and lobbying role. Obviously, we're looking for increased consumer regulation from the white paper, but what does that mean specifically? What specifically would you like to see coming out of that white paper?
Yeah, like I said, I mean, this is going to be a culmination, I think, of lots of things that have been pincering towards a better deal for tenants. I think we will hopefully see something around a, C1 regulation. We will want to see a proactive regulator who is looking at this, is asking for evidence of how tenants have been involved in the decisions that affect them. So I think we're going to see a suite of KPIs, probably of some kind, that we will be asked, providers will be asked to report against. How much of those will be kind of qualitative rather than quantitative stuff? I don't know where that balance is going to land. We were involved in some work early on to help with that. We did some tenant roundtables about what was important to tenants, that balance of the two. Where that'll end up landing, I don't know. But every indication is coming that we are going to see providers having to proactively give evidence of how tenants' voices have been heard at board level, how they've impacted services, and that tenants can then raise that when that's not happened. So that is the step forward that we want to see, the regulator proactively regulating consumer issues.
Okay. And coming from a different direction in a sense, but some folks in the sector would argue that as far as investing in customer relationships goes, actually kind of pounds and pence investment, we've got to put something behind this. The social housing sector not necessarily exposed to the same sort of market forces that a commercial sector organisation might be, in terms of let's invest in customer relationships so that we can increase revenue, we can extend revenue, we can extend loyalty, etc. Those commercial factors. If you were sat in front of a hard-nosed FD who was saying, "Why should I do this?" what would your response to him be? How would you convince him or her?
I think, there's the ESG agenda, so some people will be very interested in that. So I think there's that side, but put that to one side. I mean, TPAS talks about, what engagement is about saving money, improving services and long-lasting change for communities. And that, for me, just sums it up. Engagement does save money. I think, Paul Hackett is the person that describes this best from Optivo. He talks about when, with their tenants, they overserved. They did too much. It was ridiculous. Tenants didn't want it. So I think, if you're a hard-nosed FD, to be told, actually, we could cut some things out here. We don't need to do half of that. Don't want it. That's the primary driver. I think I talked before about driving out duplication. Tenants will spot that quicker than anybody else. Where is somebody else doing this better? So there's a hard-nosed answer for an FD to say we can drive that out. But ultimately, I just think we've got so many examples where scrutiny in particular, and I think that's the key one here, has looked at a service for not much money. It doesn't cost a lot of money to run a scrutiny panel, let's be honest here. We'll look at a service, look at it in detail, and make you thousands of pounds worth of savings just by getting their involvement. My favourite again is always from Optivo. It's an old one now, but it's a goodie. It's £25,000 a year saved just because tenants looked at the rent statement and said we could design this better, we could send it out with information better. If people need hard-nosed figures, there's plenty in there in the sector.
Excellent. Okay, that's all been fascinating, Jenny. Thank you for joining us. Really interesting presentation, loads of insights to take away, and thank you for fielding the questions as well.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that, Jenny. As mentioned, we had the recording of Jenny there from our previous webinar, some really interesting insights and some good questions. We had a few more questions come in that we will be posing to Jenny separately and getting back to people who have posted those. So it's great to get that strategic and policy perspective Jenny, but then see how that connects directly on the ground in terms of real customers and customer voice. Apologies for the sound issues there. We had some sound issues early on in the presentation. I think all that is resolved now, so hopefully everything is coming through loud and clear. For anyone who missed elements of the housekeeping, the key things are that in the top right-hand corner of your view there should be a questions tab and a chat tab. Please do submit questions to for our speakers throughout the presentations, and we'll collate those and run the Q&A at the end as we did with Jenny. There's also the polls section as well. Please don't forget that. Really interested in your thoughts, your opinions, and your responses to our poll questions. So it's time to introduce our second speaker now, Rowena Chiplin, who's Head of Income Services at Metropolitan Thames Valley. She's going to give us a deep dive on how her team responded to the increased arrears risk that came with lockdown restrictions. It's a great story, how the team rallied to respond to those restrictions and do so in a way that protected income whilst also strengthening those customer relationships. So again, don't forget the questions, fire those into the questions tab. I'll be collating those and putting those to Rowena at the end of her presentation. So without further ado, if I could hand over to you, Rowena.
Thanks. Hi, my name's Rowena Chiplin. I'm Head of Income Services at Metropolitan Thames Valley Housing. I'm here to talk about resilient relationships and how social housing providers are putting customer relationships at the heart of sustainable tenancies. So just to give you a bit of background about us, Metropolitan Thames Valley was formed in October 2018 after the merger of Metropolitan Housing Trust and Thames Valley Housing. Our ethos is that we believe that everyone should have a home and the chance to live well. We provide housing at all different levels of affordability, as well as a range of care and support services. This includes mental health services and transitional services. We have 57,000 properties across 143 local authority areas. 30,000 of these are general needs and 15,000 of these are home ownership. We operate in London, South East, East Midlands and the East of England, as you can see on the map. We divide our local authorities into key and core boroughs. So our core boroughs have over 1,000 properties each. And our core boroughs in London are Haringey, Brent, Enfield, Hackney, Hounslow, Lambeth, Sutton and Wandsworth. So a mix of north and south. We started working with Voicescape in 2014. At the time, we were following our income protection strategy, which we'd launched with the welfare reform changes that were coming into place. And the key themes of that strategy were about making data-driven decisions, making the best use of technology and building resilience in the team. So Voicescape came on board as an outcome of that strategy to use better use of data and better technology. So if we go forward to March 2020, we're entering the COVID time. At that point, our customer relationship became even more important than it was before. We completely changed our focus to provide support rather than collections activity, and we reset all our targets based on customer contact rather than arrears targets. And we had a number of support offers for customers that we set up at that time. We wrote some new arrears letters, which again were referencing the situation that we were in and offering more support. We tried to make them more empathetic using behavioural insights, and we also offered a money advice referral as part of our arrears process. The money advice team, which sits within the income team, we extended the support that they offer. Previously, they just supported tenants, but they're now supporting shared owners and leaseholders as well. We set up the offer of deferred payment plans for any customers who were suffering financial hardship. We would go through an income and expenditure with them and offer them payments in the future, so more flexibility for them to fit in with their financial situation. We put some extra funds in our tenant welfare fund. This fund was set up in August 2018, and so far this year we've spent 105k. We also offered the funds out to shared owners as well as just tenants. We set up a COVID support hub, and this was run by our community investment team. And for any customer reporting being affected by COVID, they were referred through to this team to get a holistic assessment of how we could support them. The table that's included on this slide on the right hand side shows the support that's being offered by the support hub. So number one, requests for help were to do with food. So that was a immediate support with a practical solution. So we were sending out supermarket vouchers. And then second, we've got the money and benefits advice, which is expected given people losing their jobs and having to claim universal credits and other types of benefits. So that was second. And then other stuff that the community investment team offer around fuel poverty, well-being, employment advice and support, and practical assistance. Practical assistance was things like picking up people's prescriptions, which we were able to help with. And the housing teams, they started doing welfare calls. So they called all customers identified as being vulnerable at the start of lockdown, just to make sure if there was anything we could do to support them. So to date, I think we've done upwards of 10,000 calls to customers in this category. Other things that were going on at the same time that weren't related to COVID, but were just in our existing plans, was introducing Voicescape collections to our other collections team. So this is the team that sits in the former Thames Valley area, and that happened in May. And also MTVH Online, which is our customer self-serve portal, that was launched at the end of 2019, and the rollout was progressing during 2020. So some information here about Voicescape collections. As I said before, customer relationship, customer contact was key, and this is where we focused all our activity. So you can see a massive increase in the number of conversations that we're having in the graph on the left-hand side. Just to explain the dip in April, that was while we were setting our agents up to work from home. We had to implement a soft phone solution so that we could run calls to collect while they were working from home on their laptops, and that took the IT team a couple of weeks to do that, which was quite impressive, but it just meant we couldn't run at normal activity during April. But then you can see we've picked that up considerably in May, June and July. If you compare to February, the number of conversations we've had has increased massively. We're also running it for longer every day. So we used to run it for about 2 hours a day. Now we're running it for between 4 and 5 hours a day. So you can see that on the total active time graph, which shows we're well over 600 hours per month spent having conversations with customers via Voicescape. So the conversation conversion rate, that's the cases that we put into Voicescape compared to the successful conversations that we have with people, is now at 43%. So that is the highest it's ever been, and we're really pleased with that number. And it just shows that customers are wanting to speak to us as well. So the thing with Voicescape is that it does drive higher contact into the team overall. So of the 43% of people we spoke to, the other 57% will either be getting a text message or an answer machine message saying that we're trying to speak to them, and then that drives conversations coming into us through the customer service centre. So overall, we've had 43,000 conversations with customers in the 5-month period up to the end of August. And that is probably the highest that we've ever had. And that is just the income team. That's not none of the other teams within Metropolitan Thames Valley. We've sent 17,000 text messages as well. which I said has driven the contact in. And we can also use Voicescape for some campaigns outside of our escalation system. So we've used it to encourage direct debit uptake for static debts. We're looking at running it for homeowners and also for some specific universal credit campaigns. One of the really interesting bits of information that's come out is the call duration. So call duration has more or less doubled, or nearly doubled, from February to July. We're having longer conversations with our customers for a variety of reasons. We're speaking to people that we've never spoken to before, people who've previously been working but have lost their jobs and they're new to the benefit system. We're setting up deferred payment plans. When we do that, we go through an income and expenditure, so that takes a bit longer. We are a team of universal credit experts, so we're offering in-depth advice to customers claiming universal credit and how to use the journal. We're doing referrals for the money advice team and for the support hub, and that takes a bit longer as well. And then we're also helping people to set up an MTVH online account so that they can self-serve in future, which is just a better service for them. So the outcome of all this increased activity is that we've seen a reduction in our rent arrears since April. So arrears peaked in April after the start of lockdown, and they are now starting to reduce, which we're very pleased with. We've had 500 customers have set up the deferred payment plans, and some of them have paid back already. If they set the plan up in March, they've already paid back the rent that they deferred paying for a while. This is also within the environment of not being able to take any legal action, so we're managing to reduce the arrears while we've had no court orders, no evictions during this time. So just so you're aware of what systems we're using, we use Northgate Universal Housing, we use RentSense for our prioritisation, case prioritisation, we use Voicescape collections for our customer contact, and we use Housing Partners as well, which gives us financial vulnerability scores, and we also use it for fraud investigations and pre-tenancy checks. So just to set some context around these figures, so in September, our arrears are reducing. They are still significantly higher than they were at year end. So we've still got a way to go to get back to where we were, but it's a very positive trend, primarily driven by our increased contact with customers. So a bit of information about universal credit. So we've had a 30% increase in the number of claims, and that's 2,000 new claims since March. The big jump in claims was between March and April, and we're expecting to see another spike in after October when furlough comes to an end. The graph on the pie chart shows the areas where we have the highest number of universal credit claims. So in London, it's Lambeth and Sutton. The reason we have so many claims in Sutton is that was back in 2015 was the full service pilot area. So we've had a large number of claims in that local authority area for quite a while. What we do with our universal credit claimants, the new cases, is that they all go through a triage process. So we haven't triaged all 2,000 claims, but we've triaged 1,000 people so far, and what we do is we use that information to identify what support needs and what referrals are required to help them manage that claim. A bit of information about MTVH Online, which I mentioned earlier. So this was ongoing and being rolled out during COVID, and as you can see from the graph, from December to August, we've had a steady increase in the number of users and a steady increase in the number of customer payments that are being made through that portal. We started the offer with fairly basic things on there. So customer payments, account inquiries, repairs is what is available currently on MTVH Online, and we're looking to expand that as we go along. But currently we take over £1.2 million per month through the online portal. So what we're trying to achieve with our increase in customer contacts is our focus is on successful tenancies. So talking back to last financial year, in 1920, our evictions went down by 23%. Obviously this was impacted by the no evictions in March when lockdown started, but we were already well towards that target anyway. So that's we're very pleased with that. The outcome of all our conversations means that we're able to do far more referrals to our money advice team. So for last year, they delivered financial gains for customers of 1.4 million. Financial gains are, for us, we measure the extra benefits the extra income that we're able to get for customers, as well as any reduction in rent arrears that goes with that. So that's an increasing figure on the previous year, up by 355k. And even more so, as at August 20, financial gains for this year are 538k, which is 129k higher than the same point last year. One of our observations from the money advice team is that they're actually far more successful working from home than we thought they would be. We always thought that a key part of that team was face-to-face contact with customers, but it seems not, because they're able to work and achieve far better figures from home, probably because they're not travelling as much, and that travelling time is spent having conversations with customers. We've also used data from housing partners to support customers before they move on to universal credit. So from that system, we pull out everyone who's currently on housing benefit and is in financial distress, and we contact them before. So we have just an ongoing campaign to contact customers before they move on to universal credit, and we've done 6,000 so far. And yeah, the outcome is we've had some really positive feedback from customers. These are all comments that we've received in the last 2 to 3 months. So the income team don't stop thinking about how they can help customers. The income officer listened to me. They were kind and patient. The team is always quick to respond. They are efficient, professional and courteous, and they are empathetic in how they deal with customers. So the outcome of all our extra work and our contact is that we are reducing our arrears as a business, but we're also supporting our customers more, delivering more financial gains for them, and also getting very positive feedback about the service that we're offering. Thank you. Any questions?
Excellent. Thanks for that, Rowena. As I mentioned, it's a fascinating story to see how that operational response can be galvanised, and to have that kind of double whammy effect of protecting revenue and improving customer relationships along the way. I think it's a real case study that can be taken forward. We have had some questions coming in, which is great. Thanks for the interaction there. So I will put some of these questions to you now, Rowena. So first of all, what surprised you most about the impact of lockdown on your customer communications? That's from Chris. Thanks for that, Chris.
I think what surprised us most was that our customers actually reached out and wanted to speak to us. So you know, sometimes it's quite hard to engage with certain groups, and you know, we have a lot of unsuccessful contacts where we're leaving messages and no one gets back to us. But I think once this happened at the end of March, and you know, they were obviously aware of the support services that we offered, the people seemed a lot more willing to engage with us and try and access those services. So you know, I've talked about the money advice team. So the referrals for the money advice team have gone up by 43% so far this year compared to last year. So I think that, I mean, I think that's quite surprising, that because maybe it was because we couldn't do we weren't doing legal action and we were just there focusing on that support. But that and the number of people, just people contacting us and willing to talk to us as an income team, traditionally seen as, you know, they just want to speak to us to get some money out of us. It was that shift to actually, yes, we need to make sure your tenancy is sustainable and you can afford to pay, but we're going to help you do that by offering all this support and offering the expertise that we've got.
So it was for the first time we were kind of reaching out to offer the customers something proactively, in a sense, rather than them expecting us to just be, like you say, chasing the rent that's made a real difference there. And that's a common theme we've seen through some of our work as well. You mentioned there the role of digital technology and particularly the portal at Metropolitan and how that's receiving payments and supporting customers. We have had a question from Lucy. What would you say is the best place to start as far as digital engagement goes for an organisation that hasn't yet adopted it or have been slow to adopt it?
In relation to a customer portal, setting up a customer portal, yeah. Yeah,
in relation to engaging customers with digital services in that way, yeah.
So the way we approached it was to target it. We had a plan from the start to target it to the right people. So first of all, we tried it with our engaged customer group, because I think the worst thing you can do is launch a product that doesn't work properly, and it just causes more frustration. So we went through our customer group. So that was quite a small group to start with, of about 30 or 40 people, and tested it with them. Is this what you want to see? Is this easy to access? How can we change this? And then once we got that right and we're satisfied with that, we then looked at the wider rollout to the rest of the customers. So we started them. The next phase was to roll out to people who were on our previous portal. We had another portal that we offered through Northgate, which was not very good, but there were people using that. So we went to them first because they'd be familiar with it. And then we rolled out to the wider group of people who weren't using it. And we made sure that there was people in place to deal with those queries. So, for example, the income team were trained up on how to help people get onto the system. Same with customer services, just making sure those resources were there to try and make it as easy as possible for people to get on. So I just think it's more about planning it and then raising the awareness bit by bit and making sure you've got a good product.
Yeah, exactly. It seems like you've been very customer centric in the way you've rolled out that strategy as well, involving customers in the design of the service to a certain extent. So again, it all comes back to the customer at the heart of it, I guess. You mentioned the shift in income collection specifically from collection to support-based approaches, largely driven by the restrictions that everybody was put under after lockdown. But that's quite a shift for some teams culturally. How did your team respond to that shift?
Very well, really. I mean, we've always had quite a support orientated approach anyway. We've had a money advice team. The money advice team was set up by the income team about 2013. So we always identified that if we make it a better experience for people to talk to us, they're more likely to talk to us in future when they're having problems. So it's always been that sort of approach. But I think it's about making sure that customers who weren't aware of that service, so the people, particularly homeowners who might have been in stable jobs before, we've had a lot more contact from them. So it's about, we've got that information available on our website. The COVID, there was a number of COVID newsletters that went out to every single resident just to say, this is our approach, please contact us, this is what we can offer. So we've always had that approach, but I think it's just making everyone aware that it's there for different groups that might not have accessed it before.
Mm-hmm. And obviously, I suppose the team had to do things quite differently, and I suppose mainly some things that we could no longer do, especially in relation to notices, evictions, etc. As we move forward, will that have a lasting change on how you approach income collection at Metropolitan, do you think?
Yeah, I would think so. It's focusing far more on what can we do to prevent this happening, rather than let's just follow the process through. I mean, we've got to follow the process through to some extent, because we've got to have a process there to sort of keep the income stream secure. But can we, adopt things like breathing space so that we give people a bit more time to resolve it? I mean, that's something that we were looking at anyway, but as with our deferred payments that we've offered, has been even more, it's been brought to the fore in this particular time, and that seems to work. There's a lot of things that we're trying to do now to support people longer term. So going into a partnership with a credit union, trying to get people to think about saving for situations like this in the future. So I think we were moving on that journey anyway, but it's sort of expanding. It's going to be even more important. I think court for the next year is going to be very difficult. It's going to be very difficult to get court orders, and you only really want to get court orders against those people who aren't engaging and had arrears prior to COVID. Everyone's got a certain percentage of customers who are like that, but the rest, maybe having a bit more time and a bit more support will resolve it for both sides.
Okay, excellent. It's fascinating stuff. We've just got one more question before we can not let you go, because we hope you come in a bit later on also. But one more question. You outlined there a number of occasions the use of technology, as I mentioned. How important do you think it will be going forward that we are leveraging new and emerging technologies to strengthen those customer relationships?
I think it's really important, because not every customer is the same, and if you don't have all these different approaches, you're not going to make an offer that's suitable for everybody. So there's some customers that really want to do everything online at their convenience. They haven't got to wait in the queue for customer services. They just want to pay, they want to look at their balance, they want to raise a repair. You've got to have that offer to make that really easy for them. And then those customers that require a bit more time and personal contact, if you're freeing up your resources, then you've got more time for those people. So that's always our aim with the digital offer. Let's expand that, get it as good as it can be for those customers who want to access it that way. And then those people who aren't digitally savvy and need a bit more support, we've got the resources then to support them.
Excellent. Yeah, so it's absolutely key going forward that we leverage those technologies for sure. Okay, Rowena, thanks again for your input there. Really fascinating. Rowena will be hanging around, and we're going to save some time at the end for a final Q&A. So please do keep the questions coming through the questions tab. So for the remaining slot, we just wanted to share some of our own insights that we've gathered through our own research in relation to the importance of the customer relationship. I think my slideshow is visible now. Is that correct? Yes. Excellent. Okay. So as I mentioned, we're at Voicescape, our focus is really on building technology and solutions to help customers help social landlords build sustainable tenancies through better customer engagement. And that means a lot of different things. But in my role as Chief Customer Officer, obviously it's my job to put our customers at the heart of everything that we do. But I don't think I can do that unless we reach out further than that to our customers' customers. Because what we're trying to do on behalf of our clients is facilitate engagement. And without understanding our customers' customers, those real people living real lives, I don't think we can quite connect those dots. So a lot of the research that we do is with housing providers, but also, as I say, reaching beyond that to understand what's going on in customers' lives in terms of the social housing tenants across the country. So I just wanted to share some insights. I mentioned that the research that we did shortly after the lockdown situation revealed a whole range of insights, but by far the key thing that came through that was the emerging sense that there's a renewed emphasis now being placed on the landlord-customer relationship. It was almost like we were starting to pick up on a mindset shift within the sector, where we were moving away from the notion that we have a customer strategy to the more of an embedded sense that the customer is the strategy. A genuine sense, a genuine commitment to putting the customer at the heart of everything that the landlord does. What also started to become a lot clearer as well was the business case for that investment in customer centricity. As I mentioned on the Q&A with Jenny, if we're going to do this properly, then we have to put some hard and fast investment behind those relationships. and reach out in new and more effective ways. Now, we've always been kind of familiar with the social impacts that we can have through better customer relationships. We understand our customers better, we design our services better, we deliver those services more effectively, and we improve outcomes for our customers. What hasn't always been as clear is the commercial driver for that investment, the commercial driver for investing in customer relationships. And this is one of the key things that started to come through some of our recent research. And it's driven by a really simple principle. And that's, whilst we may deliver services in silos, our customers definitely aren't living their lives in silos. So a customer may receive an interaction at a service touchpoint in income, in repairs separately, in call centres separately, ASB services separately, gas checks, etc. All separate silo-based services, but from the customer's experience, from your customer's experience and the tenant's experience, that is one tenancy, experienced as a connected whole, one tenancy, one landlord. So what that actually means is that from a customer experience perspective, is an experience with one element of the business, with one element, with one service, can start to influence behaviours in other areas of the business, in other areas of the tenancy. So you'll see there the flavour of that point from some of the direct quotes that we've taken from some of our research. But if we take a very basic example, what that means is if a customer has a bad experience or a negative experience with your repairs service, then that influences behaviours in other areas of the business. So potentially that means that customer has less propensity to pay, or at least less propensity to prioritise their rent when they're dealing with competing priorities around their expenditure. It may make that customer less likely to stay in for a full day when we've landed them with a full day slot for their gas safety check, etc. To make them less likely to go that extra mile and make that effort for us. So in terms of the commercial impact of investing in customer relationships, that underlying relationship influences demand behaviours. So having a positive relationship, good customer experiences across the piece positively influences those demand behaviours, reduces cost to serve. So we're starting to see the sector kind of to see this through a commercial as well as a social lens, and look at customer relationships as our opportunity to balance that social and commercial impact that lies at the heart of most social landlord businesses. And we're also starting to see that theme come through the different and new ways in which providers are collecting and interpreting their customer satisfaction data. So we have a feedback tool that collects customer satisfaction data for a range of our clients. And what we're doing with those providers is encourage them along this direction, along this dimension, along the bottom there, from a tactical use of that data through to a strategic, and then on to a holistic use of that data, to unlock the power of that data to drive those customer relationships. And what we mean by that is, over the tactical end, we see providers using customer satisfaction data to jump on an interaction when it goes wrong. So we send a transactional survey, picks up elements of dissatisfaction when something's gone wrong with one of the interactions, and almost in real time, colleagues can jump on that issue and address it there and then, and we prevent that developing into a formal complaint. And that's great, because to react responsively in that way and quickly and to resolve a situation is important. What we're seeing, and also what we're encouraging through the use of our platform, is to move in a more strategic direction in terms of how we interpret that data. So yeah, let's do the real-time piece, but then let's also take a more strategic approach to analysing data over time. So in terms of trends and more robust indicators within the data regarding satisfaction or dissatisfaction, how we use that as an evidence base for targeting service improvements. So those trends of dissatisfaction pointing clearly towards areas of service and delivery that might need attention to improve that customer experience. And then if we extend that even further over towards a more holistic approach, building on the point from the previous slide, we have a situation where we're collecting customer satisfaction data from across the tenancy. We're collecting behavioural data from across the tenancy. We can start to pick up on those relationships i.e. where there a particular source of type of satisfaction in one area of the tenancy might be influencing positive or negative demand behaviours in other areas of the tenancy. And then if you get to that level of sophistication in terms of customer satisfaction data and a barometer for that underlying relationship, becomes a very powerful resource allocation tool. We know exactly where to pinpoint, exactly where to target the resource that we have, because we know which elements of service improve satisfaction and positively impact demand behaviours also. So we're seeing a much more sophisticated use of customer satisfaction data as far as building customer relationships goes also. So there's some general points there, and I just wanted to dip into a few more specific points that have come out of our research also. So this first one is definitely going to be a teaching grandma to suck eggs kind of point for most people, I think. Because the foundational importance of the repairs service, I think, is something that we're all aware of. So as far as contact volumes goes, we're probably looking at between 40 and 65% of all inbound comms being repairs related. And then when it comes to satisfaction ratings and the kind of counterpart impact on relationship, then we are looking at the repairs experience largely crowding out all other service experiences. So to all intents and purposes, for many of your customers, you are your repairs service. And to be fair to the customer, if we view that from the customer's point of view, think about that customer experience, that repairs service is the key, the most direct and salient kind of return on investment, so to speak, for the rent that they pay for their property each week. It's a very tangible return that they get for the rent that they're paying. So at a rational level, it's a very kind of, there's a hypersensitivity around that repairs experience. But then also, if we look deeper into that, if we think about at an emotional level, at a certain level within a provider business, we might be thinking about assets and properties, but fundamentally from the customer's perspective, we're dealing with families and homes. So for a property to be in disrepair and to be having to live with that, some of the themes that we're picking up on in our qualitative research suggests that there could be, impacts on self-esteem, impacts on mental health, impacts on stigma associated with that repair service if it isn't working in the way that's delivering a decent customer experience. So having your ear to the ground, understanding what's going on and what's going right and wrong with the repairs service is absolutely crucial, because if you get repairs right, then you're well on your way already to a strong and healthy customer relationship, is the sense that we're getting. Another theme that's coming through our conversations, and again, both with providers and tenants, is this move from what used to be digital by default to what now might be considered digital by design. And it's at this point that I like to introduce my mum into the debate. So my mum is 75. She's been a social housing tenant, well, since I was 6 months old. So I'll leave it for you to work out how long that has actually been, but it is a very long time. And always has been, committed to being a social housing tenant. But at the moment, she's pretty peeved off with what she perceives as the pestering that she's getting from her landlord to do everything online, to make her payments online, to book repairs online, and manage appointments online, etc. Mum doesn't want to do that. She can't do that. She's not within her kind of frame of reference, despite my efforts to get her to kind of into the 21st century. So what we're seeing there, the reason I introduced my mum is that depending on, if we go with the default, with a blanket digital by default strategy, we're seeing a clear negative impact on customer satisfaction and customer relationship with mum there. So by all means, it is about getting as many people transacting online as possible. Let's go for that objective. But let's think, okay, let's do that only when we're not having a negative impact on customer satisfaction and when we're not having a negative impact on service delivery. So digital by design is about understanding which customers and which interactions are most appropriate for that sort of interaction, that sort of engagement. And as we've seen from previous speakers, we're seeing that coming through in how they're approaching their digital engagement. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach, and we need to leave those other channels open to some customers. Because at the end of the day, you know, people, a good proportion potentially of your customer base just want to speak to a human being. And this transcends demographics, it transcends digital literacy sometimes. There's a deep, a fundamental human need really to be listened to feel like you've been heard, for your requests to have been logged, and to have that sense that someone is dealing with it. And some of those feelings, some of those customer experiences can only come through conversations rather than through more kind of digital only interactions. And that's part of the reason why at Voicescape, when we're working with our clients, we encouraged a distinction between transactional and relational engagement. Now, both sorts of these engagements have their role to play, but it's very much a question of how we tailor our engagement according to customer needs. And this provides a useful lens, we find, to think about that engagement through. So a transactional engagement tends to be tactical and short-term focused. We're looking for a quick response. It does tend to be reactive. Something's gone wrong, so we're in touch. It tends to be organization focused. It's about what the provider wants, not necessarily about what the customer wants. And it tends to be process driven. It's been initiated, spat out by a standardized process. And that's fine. There are some customers and some interactions for whom that sort of engagement is relevant and right. But we're also then emphasizing the need to look at engagement through a relational lens. So this is a more strategic approach to engagement. It's a longer term investment in having conversations with customers so that we can better understand the underlying situation that they're currently facing, and whatever issue it is that we're dealing with, the context that sits in. So that's a much more proactive approach. And as Rowena outlined, and some of the things that Jenny tapped into, that's really come to the fore over the COVID period in terms of providers proactively reaching out to customers to see if they're okay, to check in, not necessarily to want anything from them, but to offer them something. So this is a much more customer focused approach to engagement, and it is much more insight driven based on the needs of customers. And we think about some of what might be considered the most transactional engagements that we might consider. Making a payment, for instance, feels very transactional. Booking an appointment feels very transactional. Requesting for information, basic information, feels very transactional. And that's fine. But you can also apply a relational lens to those basic interactions as well. If it comes to making a payment, if that's surrounded by a conversation rather than just a trigger, then if there are any issues going on in terms of barriers to payment, support needs, etc., that's coming through that conversation. If we think about just booking an appointment, for instance, let's say a gas safety appointment, then if we have a conversation around that appointment, then we end up with a situation where we're much more likely to secure a first-time access, for instance, because we've involved the customer in that decision and in that conversation. So relational engagements aren't for everyone all the time, but neither are transactional engagements. And it's about understanding how we use that lens to hit those customer expectations and improve those outcomes. And just a couple of quotes there that we feel really capture that difference, that in customer experience between a transactional and a relational approach. Obviously the context there is looking for payment, but you can see there are very, very different customer experiences. And to some of Rowena's points, then what does that mean for then the customer relationship going forward and the subsequent behaviours, cooperation and engagement we can expect from these two different customers who've been exposed to the different engagements. So this brings us to the last section in terms of a framework that we've been exploring that we're calling Get in Touch, Stay in Touch, Be in Touch. Again, this has come directly from some of the research we've done with customers, reflected in some of the quotes that we can see across the bottom there. So as we talked to customers and providers throughout that initial post-lockdown period. And again, a lot of this was driven by the proactive work that providers were doing to reach out with welfare calls and check-ins. But it started to reveal, at least for some customers, and not a minority necessarily, a desire for an ongoing relationship, an ongoing suite of contact with the landlord as the foundation for that underlying relationship. So rather than, as the quotes on the last page attested, rather than just getting in touch when we want something, or when something's gone wrong, when the wheels have fallen off, if there was a more coordinated approach to contact and engagement, that creates an underlying context for how we engage with customers, the likelihood that they engage when we do need to address a particular issue with them. So this was coming directly through some of the work that we did with customers, a desire for that. Well, why don't you just check in on me every now and again? If you knew me a bit better, then I'd be more likely to engage. And again, really interesting insight from a customer experience point of view. And this led to this notion of get in touch, stay in touch, be in touch, a potential framework for thinking more strategically about programs of engagement, about how we contact and stay contacted with our customers, and how we build those relationships. And what we mean by those three things, and in terms of get in touch, stay in touch, be in touch, obviously initially we need to get in touch. We need to open that conversation with the customer, start that engagement. But beyond that, we need to stay in touch. We don't want necessarily to be a one-off engagement or just an engagement when something has gone wrong. We want to stay in touch. We want to keep that engagement going over time. And ultimately, and this is kind of the real win here, is that if we do that, we end up being in touch. And what I mean by that is being in touch in the sense that we understand our customers. We're in touch with their needs. We're in touch with their circumstances. Which then obviously creates a whole load of opportunity in terms of the relationship and how we better respond to them. So as an overarching kind of framework, that's providing some interesting structure to thoughts around building customer relationships. But underneath that, there's a whole load of things that need to happen to execute that framework, that strategy. So as far as getting in touch goes, the first thing we need obviously is quality data. We need to be collecting, keeping and cleansing data on a regular basis so we can readily be in touch with customers. And beyond that, when we're thinking about those engagements and those contacts, then we need to be thinking in terms of what the right method is, what the right message is, what the right moment is. Getting a lot more intelligent about how we tailor our approach, tailor our contact with customers, such that it maximizes the likelihood that they will engage. Like I say, in terms of method, message, moment, tailored to those individual needs. As far as staying in touch goes, as mentioned, that's pointing more towards a more proactive, coordinated program of engagement. So we're not just reacting when something goes wrong, but every now and again, maybe on a quarterly basis, we're getting in touch proactively to check in, see how folks are doing. Are there any support needs? Do we need to update contact details, etc.? Be a rolling program of just gentle touch points. And some of the feedback that we're getting from the welfare reach outs that happened through the COVID period was that, well, first of all, positive. This is great, because if you reach out to me in this way, I can respond if I need to, which would be great, because there is a support need or there is a service need. But by the same token, if I don't need you, then I just don't need to respond. That's fine. But even if I don't need to respond, thirdly, what that has done is made me feel really valued as a customer. So that ongoing program, proactive, not just reactive. And then if we create a high quality customer experience around that, like I say, create that sense that I feel valued as a customer, we're then setting the foundations for future engagement, more likely to engage in future, more likely to kind of respond to future requests. And then if we do that well, as I said, we get the kind of the golden egg in terms of being in touch. Because if we're getting in touch and staying in touch well, what we're doing is accruing data. We're making those contacts with customers. We're understanding when, where, how they're responding to us. We're having conversations that give us a better understanding of their needs. So then what we can do with that then is look to be converting that data into insight. And that's really where the payoff is in terms of being in touch with customers, understanding their needs, better responding to those needs, designing services. And obviously this isn't all about giving the customer a better service. That's a huge part of this. But this is also about how we deliver those services in the most efficient way possible for the business. So to come back to Jenny's point earlier on in terms of the Octavia point around overserving, how we can drive out that waste by understanding where we're delivering services that customers don't need or don't value, or are too excessive. It is as much a part of this approach as understanding areas where the service provision needs to be invested in and improved. Okay, so as I mentioned, just a whistle-stop tour of some of the insights we've drawn from our research that we feel are relevant for how social housing providers can better strengthen relationships with customers. We've slightly run over, but we have had some questions coming in. And we'll just have a look at this. So we've got a question from Lucy, and for an organisation where rent arrears has always been a challenge and appears to be an even bigger challenge in the future, how should organisations support their tenants to make better financial decisions? Okay. Rowena, do you want to have a first run at that? How do we make...
Yeah, that's an easy one.
Good.
I think I think with something like that, there's so many. There's not one solution for that particular question. There's got to be a bit of an overall plan and a bit of a strategy around how you're going to do that. So, you know, it's knowing your customers and knowing your areas and what are their particular things that are causing problems. I mean, what is rent arrears a challenge because of X, Y, Z? I don't know. The local authority maybe isn't very good, or you've got a particular block where you have a lot of challenging people. So it's about knowing that and then trying to build a plan on top of that. So, you know, there's always, for any plan, you've got to have some targets. So are the staff performing? Are targets where they are? What's your contact rates like with customers? Do you have the expertise in-house to help customers? How can you access that expertise? Do you have your in-house, or do you have a relationship, build a relationship outwards? I mean, we had a money advice team internally because we needed that expertise in-house. We thought that would be better, and I think the money advice team pays for itself, and I think most organisations will say the same. What they get reduction in rent arrears, you probably wouldn't get that if they weren't there. So but that requires funding and approval and all that. So I just think you have to start from scratch and identify what the areas are and then have a bit of a plan.
Yeah, definitely. I think like you say, it's all about individual circumstances a lot of the time, isn't it? And again, just tapping into some of the research we've done about if it's about helping, to the question, tenants make better financial decisions, then it's understanding the context in which those decisions are made, because a lot of social housing tenants obviously are living in quite hard-pressed situations. There's a lot of stress goes towards that. That stress then doesn't necessarily lead to the most effective decision-making process when it comes to rationally deciding who gets paid this week, who gets paid next week. And I think also there's a question there of, is there a decision to be made? Because fundamentally we'll be dealing with customers who are on the kind of the won't pay, of the can't pay, won't pay dimension. So for some customers, there isn't a financial decision to be made potentially sometimes, because there just isn't enough money to kind of make the ends meet. Okay. So thanks for that question. We do have another one coming in from the social sphere, from Twitter. So a message to Rowena on the reduction of arrears. Have any trends been identified, such as an increased number of tenancies ending, or maybe APAs, an increased number of DHP applications? And that's from Ryan via Twitter. Thanks for that, Ryan.
So not an increased number of tenancies. ending, so less of that void activity, far less than normal, so that will help. Definitely an increase in APAs. I mean, our approach is that, I know there's different approaches across different landlords, but our approach is that we apply for APAs at the time we're allowed to apply for APAs. For the rent element, we don't apply for the arrears without some further work, but we will always apply after 2 months to get the rent paid direct. So if you think about how universal credit works, we would have had a peak in arrears in April as people went onto universal credit. 2 months later, those payments are coming through as the UC claims process. So that is helping to pay towards those arrears as we receive those backdated payments. But we need to keep those conversations with those customers on universal credit to make sure they pay us first when their payment comes through. That's why we've focused so much on the conversations. But also, I don't know if others are the same, but our DHPs are now paid in line with, sorry, not DHPs, APAs are now paid in line with customers, so we don't have to wait an additional 4 weeks to get it on a schedule. And that started in August, so that will definitely have helped our arrears, because it's getting rid of that technical lag while we wait for the payment to come in. DHPs, yeah, we constantly apply for DHPs, and I think local authorities are a bit less stringent with some of their rules that you have to follow about getting DHP. So the money advice team are getting lots of money through DHPs. But yeah, I think otherwise the main trend is just that consistent, persistent conversation with people, and just keeping on top of it and offering that support to make sure they can be in a situation where they can pay us.
Excellent, thanks, Rowena. I like that consistent, persistent conversation. That's a nice little soundbite we can take away. Excellent. So thanks for that, Rowena. We've exhausted the questions now, and we have run over slightly, so I think we'll bring things to a close there. It just remains for me to thank you, Rowena, for your time today. Like I said, a really fascinating story and insightful answers to the questions that have been coming through. Thanks again to Jenny from TPAST. Again, a lot of insights that we can take forward there. Please do keep the discussion going. I've mentioned a number of times the research that we produce at Voicescape, in addition to the actual kind of technology solutions that we deliver. So our website voicescape.co.uk is the repository for a lot of that research. I mentioned the hashtag Voicescape Thought Leaders. Let's keep that discussion going also. And we do have a lively LinkedIn channel also where we're publishing insights and updating people. So please do keep the discussion going. All attendees will receive a recording of this session, and then further down the line, when all the webinars in this series have been completed, we will be putting together a summary pack also. So I'd like to just thank our speakers and especially our attendees. I hope you found that useful, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.